Hi Gators! Corinne Rey-Bellet was considered one of the world's best skiers when she retired in 2003. Unfortunately, just 3 years into her retirement, she was brutally murdered in her own home by her husband, from whom she was estranged at the time. Hers is a story of triumph and resilience, but also of great tragedy. Let's listen to it. Corinne Rey-Bellet was born on the 2nd of August 1972 in Val-d'Illiez, a municipality in southwestern Switzerland. Corinne was raised in the hamlet of Les Crosets, which sits within that municipality, and is actually a popular holiday destination for people looking to enjoy a ski break. Corinne's father, Adrien, was part of the local bourgeoisie, which meant that he had inherited both land and power. The family owns around 100 self-catering apartments, a ski school, and a snack bar. Les Crosets is nestled in the Porte du Soleil, a major ski sports site comprising 13 resorts between Mont Blanc in France and Lake Geneva in Switzerland. And at 1,670 meters, or 5,480 feet, Les Crosets is the resort with the highest altitude among those on the Swiss side. Growing up in such a picturesque place, surrounded by people who love nothing more than to ski, it came as little surprise that Corinne began to show an interest in the sport early in life. After graduating from a local commercial college, Corinne was finally able to solely focus on skiing and truly pursue her passion. So a very exciting time for her. With a few years of training already under her belt, Corinne became a member of the Val-d'Illiez ski club and competed at the Ski World Cup for the first time at only 17 years of age. But despite her best efforts, this turned out to be too soon. During the competitions in 1989 and 90 and 1990-91, she was not able to achieve her desired result, not even in her favorite discipline, the giant slalom. Having failed that, Corinne was unable to fulfill her biggest dream, which was to qualify for the 1991 World Ski Championships. But those were just the early days of her outstanding career, and she was by no means giving up. In January of 1992, Corinne won her first World Cup points by coming 20th place in the giant slalom in Hinterstoda, Austria. With that win, she actually managed to qualify for the 1992 Winter Olympics, where she came in 17th place. Just 2 months later, she came third in the giant slalom in Crans-Montana, the last race of the season, with the press hailing her a success and expecting great things from her. But in the 2 years that followed, Corinne was never able to live up to that expectation. In the winter 94-95 season, she competed in the European Cup and FIS races. FIS races are ski competitions organized by the International Ski Federation that do not belong to any racing series, so nothing to write home about. Naturally, she was really disappointed in herself. During that season, Corinne did, however, manage to win the European Cup and the first Swiss Championship title in giant slalom, the latter in her home village of Les Crozets. But these, to her, lesser titles just felt like a huge letdown at the end of the season. Unfortunately, during 95-96, she didn't perform much better, and it would take another 2 years for her big break. Corinne would deliver her breakthrough performance during the 1998-99 season, when she first won the downhill and then the supergiant slalom in the World Cup at Saint-Anton-am-Arlberg within just 3 hours. Interestingly, she hadn't even made the podium since 1992 before winning these. Altogether, Corinne would win 5 World Cup titles, compete in the Olympics, and secure 3 World Cup downhill victories between 1999 and 2002. However, in 2003, 15 years into her career, Corinne was forced to end her skiing career due to a severe injury, but not before placing second in the women's downhill at the World Championships in Saint-Maury. After her exit, she began to train as a physiotherapist in order to help those like herself, and whatever free time she had, she spent horseback riding and giving interviews to local magazines, which earned her a decent income. Corinne would also spend a lot of time in the kitchen. She was very fond of cooking, something she found relaxed her quite a bit. And cooking wasn't a new hobby. It was something she was advised to do during the height of her career, as it really helped her better handle the pressure of having to perform on the slopes. In 2002, aged 29, Corinne had married a man by the name of Geralds Stadler, and a year prior to her injury, the pair had moved to the canton of St. Gallen, specifically to Val-d'Illiez, where his parents lived. This, despite Corinne saying she would never leave her hometown. Shortly before meeting Gerald, Corinne was a sworn single. At the time, she had just broken up with her partner due to wanting to focus exclusively on her sports career. But then she met Gerald at an investment consulting place and fell head over heels in love with him. Gerald worked for Credit Suisse, a leading financial services company, as a private banker. When the two met, her family was not particularly impressed by him. They wanted more for Corinne. Gerald, who was born in the German-speaking part of Switzerland, came from a modest background. He was the son of a car mechanic from a faraway valley, and had little going for him in their eyes. But according to Corinne's first cousin, Gerald was a good-looking man. He spoke decent French, Corinne's mother tongue, and he had a good job with a large company. So he was able to provide for her, not that she needed it. But most importantly, Corinne loved him, so her family did the best they could to accept him. And this was easier for some than it was for others. Her father would later admit to the press that Gerald had a violent streak about him, something he had observed on several occasions. Meanwhile, her mom said that both her daughter and Gerald had very strong alpha personalities. Corinne wasn't the type of woman to just take abuse. She'd always stand up for herself and not take his shit. Just 1 year after their wedding, Corinne fell pregnant and gave birth to a son whom she called Kevin. But Corinne was a very private person and didn't tell anyone what really went on in their relationship. That is also evident from the lack of media coverage on their relationship status. To some of her friends, the separation came as a shock, because Corinne had just fallen pregnant again for a second time. But she was dead set on leaving. She wanted out. She wanted to be happy. So at 3 months pregnant, she moved out of their house in Val-d'Illiez and into a first-floor flat at her parents' chalet back in Les Crosets with her son. It was a Sunday, April the 30th of 2006, and little Kevin had spent the day with his father, as his parents had separated just a few days prior. At around 7 p.m., Gerald then jumped into his black Audi to drop Kevin back to his mother. When he arrived at his estranged wife's apartment, things were calm at first. Corinne was not home alone. Her mother Verena and her brother Alain were both at her place for a visit. As it was getting late, both Gerald and Corinne went to put 2.5-year-old Kevin to bed. He was sleepy. And when he was tucked away and sleeping soundly, they went back downstairs to see Verena and Alain, supposedly for a quick chat and to not leave things awkward. But the couple had not been living apart for long, and with the wound still fresh, things soon turned sour. At around 9:30 p.m., an argument ensued. And where the average person would not stoop any lower than the odd insult, Gerald reached for his 9mm pistol and shot Corinne straight in the heart. Afterwards, he turned his attention to her mother and fired 4 times, wounding her critically, before shooting Alain 5 times. Kevin was left in his bed. Unfortunately, both Corinne and Alain died at the scene. Meanwhile, neighbors had heard the shots, and an ambulance arrived just in time to whisk Verena away to a local hospital. She would later recover following a stint in intensive care. In the meantime, the police had been notified by neighbors and immediately suspected Gerald, who had quite literally fled the scene. While Verena was fighting for her life after having watched both of her kids die, Alain was back in his Audi. Police tried to locate his whereabouts for 3 days, when on Wednesday that week, his body was found in a forest near Ouémont, just outside of Hollon. 34-year-old Gerald, the coward that he was, had shot himself. When Verena came to, police interviewed her, desperate to find a motive, but they just couldn't establish one. Speculation grew that being a part of such a wealthy family became more than this humble man could handle, which is ridiculous as he wasn't going to be a part of this family any longer anyway. And let's stop the pity party, he's a massive turd. Police then also interviewed Geralds' parents and asked them whether they could imagine what had driven him to do this and why. And they told police that shortly after the attack, which they of course didn't know happened, Gerald gave them a call. Gerald asked them to please drive to his in-laws and pick up Kevin before hanging up. 2 hours later, he called them again to check whether they had left their house and were on their way. They never heard from him again. Authorities figured that this was his last revenge act against his in-laws. One thing Corinne never wanted to happen was for Kevin to grow up with her in-laws, and this is something she'd always tell all her friends. In case something happened to either one of them, she wanted Kevin with her parents. It was also suspected that Gerald thought that Corinne's parents were in favor of her getting a divorce, and that he wasn't having it. After Corinne's death at only 33, Kevin, very sadly, didn't get to live with his grandparents, as was decided by the court. Despite his grandparents applying to be his guardians and foster parents, Kevin was sent off to another foster family that lived near them. Kevin was to spend his childhood living with his grandfather's niece, who had just married and had 2 young kids, so her young family was deemed the better choice over his grandparents. So sad. Verena said that whenever Kevin visits, she never says a bad word about his father and only wants him to have the best life. Today, Kevin is doing very well. He is a great student, does sports, has a strong personality like his mom, and visits his grandparents whenever he can. Corinne's case understandably caused quite the stir in Switzerland. People began discussing and critiquing the country's liberal gun laws. In Switzerland, every man under 42 is issued with a firearm following the mandatory military service. Gerald, who was a captain in the Swiss army and a full-time idiot, also kept his gun at home. However, carrying a handgun around is absolutely not the norm in Switzerland. I should know, I've met a fair share of Swiss people, being Swiss and all. So the fact that he brought his gun along to see his soon-to-be ex-wife indicated that this was all premeditated. In a later interview, Corinne's father said he is certain that his daughter's murder was planned, and that the family had begged her to stay away from him, fearing what he might do to her. Sadly, Corinne's brother Alain was due to get married to his girlfriend in May of that year, just a month after his untimely death. They were due to get married in the very church his sister's funeral would later be held. Authorities could never piece together just what made Gerald murder his wife, and perhaps they never will. Murders like these don't make a lot of sense, and perhaps that is the hardest part to come to terms with. Thank you for watching today's case. It was a short one, but important, as any story is. See you on the next one. Ciao, Gators.